Good morning. It's 10 a.m. on Tuesday, September 22nd, 2020, and this is 10 on Tuesdays. Today, we're discussing a common issue many small businesses in the service industry face. Technicians are often the driver of many tax determinations, yet they're not actively involved in how those decisions are made. Don't worry, I'm not suggesting technicians need to be accountants, but I have some solutions to improve tax compliance without burdening the technicians. I'm Holly Hoffman, founding partner and CEO of the Sales and Income Tax Advisory Network. Prior to creating my company, I worked for the Wisconsin Department of Revenue as an auditor, speaker, and sales tax specialist. My passion is to help provide sales tax education and support to tax professionals, businesses, and associations with the goal of building a network of empowered taxpayers. For more information, visit salesandincometax.com. Thank you for joining my web chats, 10 on Tuesdays, every Tuesday from 10 to 10:30 a.m. You can check out previous episodes on my 10 on Tuesdays channel. To find my channel, go to salesandincometax.com and look for the 10 on Tuesdays logo. Click on the logo to register or click on watch previous episodes to access the 10 on Tuesdays channel. So again, today's discussion is about sales tax decisions. And one of the challenges and one of the things I love about sales tax is decisions aren't just made by the accountant. It's not made once a year. You definitely need sales tax planning, but the planning comes throughout the year. It's usually made by multiple levels throughout the company. So even if you have a small company, and today I'm kind of focusing on like HVAC, plumbing, electrical type companies, service companies that have technicians that go out and do the service work because they're generally handling many of the points where tax treatment is determined. So for instance, tax decisions are made when there's a sale. How items are used can determine tax treatment, and purchases at the time of purchase, tax treatment needs to be determined. And often our frontline technicians, salespeople, estimators, these folks are in fact making tax treatment determinations. And how often are these folks involved in understanding the sales and use tax implications of language they use, determinations, descriptions, whether or not they're paying or collecting tax, documentation they may be collecting. Usually these folks don't want to know that. They don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They're just trying to get their job done. They're providing a service to the customer. They're repairing what needs to be repaired, cleaning what needs to be cleaned, and moving on to the next job. But today I want to talk about the importance of educating those folks, how much you need to educate them, and how you want to go about that to ensure you have a good sales and use tax system in place for your company. So I just talked about this a little bit, but sales tax decisions by technicians, technicians are often writing service descriptions. Nowadays with technology, they may be invoicing and collecting payment on site when they're out doing the service, listing materials used on the job, and they're likely also purchasing parts or supplies while they're out in the field. So they're really involved in all aspects of sales and use tax decisions. What I am seeing and have been seeing, and as I've been speaking the last 9 years about contractor sales and use tax law, that these technicians, the estimators, all these folks that are involved in creating the documentation for invoices are not understanding the definitions, for one, like the difference between repair versus install. Again, install is first time installation or replacing an existing item, a complete replacement. So it's like installing a water heater or removing a water heater and installing a new water heater in its place. Installing a furnace. These are fixtures. Installing a faucet is a fixture. That is different than making a repair. A repair is servicing, maybe maintaining, cleaning an existing item. So you're repairing the faucet. You're repairing the water heater by replacing the heating element. But a common error that I see is the language used on the invoice or the work order filled out by the technician. It interchanges install and repair because in their mind, they installed a heating element, which makes sense. But the tax implications when an accountant or a bookkeeper back at the office is filling out tax information, it's do you charge tax or do you not charge tax? Is it a real property or a personal property job? And when you're using install and repair intermittently and not being consistent about it, it creates a miscommunication. And if a technician is taught, well, installs are real property, repairs are personal property, well, then they start calling everything install. So it gets confusing. Not understanding that there's a difference between residential versus commercial. This can happen at every level in a small company of not understanding the difference, but tax treatment at a residential facility is different than at a commercial facility. In commercial facility, you have to determine if it's a building serving a building function primarily, more than 50% of the time, or serving a process function, and that can change the tax treatment on that. Another miscommunication is what is a sale versus a service, sale of materials, or is it materials provided with the service? So that can change the tax treatment depending on how it's used. Are you charging tax on those materials or are you paying use tax on the purchase of those materials? It depends, and it depends on what type of service it is. That's another thing, understanding if it's real or personal property work being done. Another issue that causes miscommunications and errors in tax treatment, vague description of multiple services at one location. So how do you allocate between the real and personal property services, the taxable and non-taxable services, if it's a vague description? I have on here also location of fixture being serviced. We know there's a difference for repairs to a kitchen versus a bathroom. Bathroom fixtures, repairs are taxable. So it's important to identify location, and sometimes that's not communicated to technicians, and understanding that there's a tax implication for that. Location of fixture being serviced, we just discussed that. Another issue that I've seen is call for service versus actual service provided. And what I mean by that is you may have a diagnostic or something that you're performing, and the initial call to the office that the work order you were sent out on was for one thing, and you get out there and you diagnose the issue and you realize it was something else, and that's the service you provided. Well, the call for service, the diagnostic, the trip charge, it could be so many different things that folks call it, but that is reliant on what service was provided. So the tax treatment of that depends on what service was provided. Are you repairing a furnace? Are you out there providing an electrical service? Is it real or personal property? It depends. So understanding that the call for service charge, the diagnostic charge, is going to depend on what service is provided. Recording materials consumed in the job. This really gets at use tax issues and quantifying use tax or trying to identify how materials were consumed. A lot of technicians, this is detail work, and maybe this is something they don't feel is that important, and they'll skip over things or not record things, and that causes an issue later on. And if they're making purchases in the field, maybe they broke a tool and they're picking up a new tool, or they're picking up materials, and how are those materials used? Did it go into inventory on their truck? Did it go directly into a job? What type of job? These are things that maybe the technician isn't thinking of. They don't understand the tax impact of that, but the burden is really on the technician to identify that. How does the accountant determine that afterwards? So really the solution is providing resources and training. Again, like I alluded to at the start of today's session, I don't think that technicians need to be accountants. I think technicians need to be informed enough to understand the tax implications, that there are tax implications. You don't have to go into detail, but there are tax implications based on descriptions and information provided or not provided in their paperwork. What I think, and I've always had this approach, you can try it in any aspect of your professional or personal life, but instead of arguing with someone that isn't providing you what you need to help them provide you what you need. Make it as easy as possible, because ultimately it's less work on you if they're giving you exactly what you need. So company-wide, understanding and using consistent phrases and verbiage. So I had talked about repair versus install. So sales tax law has very specific language for things. What's real property? What's install? What's a repair? When we talk about repair, it really means a whole list of things: repair, service, alteration, fitting, cleaning, painting, coating, towing, inspection, and maintenance. Inspection and maintenance are common things technicians may do. Are they understanding that all falls under service? So maybe just coming up with phrases and verbiage. If they're filling out work orders, nowadays most everything is technology based. If you have drop downs where they pick language versus creating their own, or if they're creating their own, maybe you have a cheat sheet of how things are described, and use consistent phrases and verbiage. So when you see something on the work order and you're in accounting and entering it for the invoice, you are thinking the same thing, you're on the same page, you understand it the same way. So tax treatment is provided in the same way. Create default tax settings. So sales and use tax is fact-based, and there's a whole lot of facts that go into one decision of whether or not something is real or personal property, whether you charge tax or not, who your end customer is, all that. However, you can, in your accounting software, generally you can have default tax settings, and I would set up with the most common. So electrical service is generally going to be real property, generally going to be not taxable. However, you can have toggles maybe on certain items that may switch between real and personal, may switch between taxable and non-taxable. and adjust those. So generally they're going to follow the other item on, so say diagnostic, that's one that could switch. It depends on what is being done at the site. So diagnostic may have a toggle. It could be taxable or non-taxable. If it's HVAC diagnostic, I guess I would default that to taxable, but leave it open to be able to be switched. And then the technician would be informed that when they're out doing a diagnostic, they're sent on a call, whatever ends up being serviced. So maybe they replace a blower motor. That item is defaulted taxable because that's a repair to a furnace. So they see that that item is taxable. They're going to make sure that the HVAC diagnostic line item is also taxable. So creating default tax settings and then very specific instructions on how that works. So it's the fewest, and that's the next one, allowing for minimal decisions in the field. The fewest decisions possible for the technicians is going to get you the best results. So give them very clear instructions, if this, then that, so that when they're out there, they don't have to be coming up with tax determinations on their own. They can trust what's in the system, they follow the clear steps, and it's going to more often than not work out correctly. So creating minimal decisions, and again, using that consistent phrases and verbiage, using drop-down boxes with predetermined language, and then provide training on basic tax implications. So you don't want to overwhelm different staff with information they don't need to know, but you want to inform them, why they're doing what they're doing. They're not going to help you out and provide you information if they don't understand the purpose behind it. So if it's important to identify if they're at a commercial or residential property when they're providing service, they'll understand to provide that information and why, so that it's taxed correctly. Maybe determining on the diagnostic, if it's at a commercial or residential facility, it brings you into a different level of options for service. So explaining why it's important of what they're doing, and again, make sure the decisions are minimal. Try to make it as simple and as concise, unlike my explanation right now. Make it as simple and concise as possible. Boil it down to basic decisions and just explain the tax implication. Because if you select this, the customer gets charged tax. If you select that, the customer is not going to be charged tax. And what are the implications of that? People generally want to do things the correct way, but they're going to take shortcuts if they don't understand why they're doing it in a certain manner. So help them to understand that, make it as simple as possible, and bring them in on understanding what role they play in tax determinations. Sales tax is so different than income tax. Income tax at the end of the year or the end of the quarter or the end of the month, if something was classified in the wrong account, you just reclassify it. You just move it to the right bucket. You can make adjusting journal entries. Sales tax, if you made the wrong decision initially, later on when you figure it out, you could now owe tax out of pocket, where if you had taxed it correctly, you could have collected that from your customer and passed on the tax. Or you may have built use tax in on your purchase of materials into the price to the customer, but the way you accounted for it, you did not report that use tax to DOR. So now at the end of the year, it's like finding money out of your own pocket. You did get that, but you didn't account for it correctly. You considered that revenue instead of that was tax liability. So making sure that you understand how things flow, making sure we talked about in one of our more recent 10 on Tuesdays about reporting. Make sure your reports pull through the correct information and that it's getting reported to DOR correctly. This is all part of that. If everyone understands better what they're doing, you're going to identify issues and concerns more easily and readily. People will see that and it'll help you just overall. But again, sales and use tax, this isn't limited to just technicians. I think everyone who either uses materials, supplies, whatever, in your business, anyone who purchases, anyone who is involved in making sales, providing estimates, anything like that, they are all involved in tax determinations as far as sales and use taxes, and they need to be involved and understand the implications of what they do. Maybe you need procedures in place to simplify so that the person making those purchases doesn't realize they're making a tax determination, but it's just built in and it's done correctly because you have procedures in place. So that is my tip today. That is what I've been finding out in the field. This is what I've seen for a long time. And it doesn't hurt to have people, especially estimators, those folks are actively involved in making tax determinations and really do need to know a little more about sales and use tax for properly creating bids. So maybe you want to consider getting them some sales tax training, having them go along with the accountants or the bookkeepers to do sales tax training. So we had a nice short session today. Well, I guess only 9 minutes short, but next week we're going to talk basics of sales tax. And I know people think, oh, basics, I know it, I get it. Basics are where most errors are made. And the problem with basics is they're pretty pervasive. I mean, think about the whole diagnostic issue I brought up. That's a basic of sales tax, what's included in sales price. But diagnostic, how many invoices is diagnostic on? How often is shipping charges on your invoices? Or do you have a delivery charge? These are basics of sales tax, but they happen frequently, so they add up quickly. So we want to go over basics of sales tax, some of the common rules, common things dealing with sales tax, and something that you need to keep in mind and check at least annually, but anytime there's a change in your procedures, personnel, software, systems, anything like that, double check your basics. So we're going to talk about that next week because it has a huge impact. I hope you guys all have a wonderful week. I want to see you here next week. Follow Sales and Income Tax on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter to receive updates and reminders about 10 on Tuesdays topics and guests. October is rolling around. I have some great guests coming. I'm going to announce them starting next week. And to rewatch this episode or to view previous episodes of 10 on Tuesdays, go to salesandincomeTax.com. Check out my 10 on Tuesdays channel, and I will see you all back here next week. Have a good week.